week before Christmas always made the Carters' little house feel smaller, not because the rooms changed, but because the calendar did. The living room held a modest tree with uneven lights, the kind that flickered when the wind hit the window frame. The kitchen held 2 mugs that had lost their shine and a stack of envelopes that looked harmless until you read the return addresses. Ray Carter, 69, kept telling himself he was done working, but his hands still smelled faintly of motor oil from helping a neighbor start a stubborn truck in the cold. Denise Carter, 66, moved slower than she used after years of standing on hospital floors, and she pretended the stiff bend in her knee was nothing but weather. They weren't hungry and they weren't helpless, but they were tired of living one surprise away from a bad month. That evening, with sleet ticking on the porch rail and the furnace making a thin, worried sound, Denise held her phone close to the lamp and reread a message from their granddaughter's mother about a school trip deposit due right after New Year's. Ray watched her face tighten and soften in cycles, like a person swallowing words. When Denise finally said, "We can't keep saying maybe next time to the kids," Ray didn't argue, because he'd been thinking the same thing in quieter ways for years. The idea didn't arrive like a grand plan, and it didn't feel like a game. It started 3 days earlier at the grocery store, when Ray ran into an old co-worker who still chased small profits the way some men chased fishing holes. The man mentioned storage auctions the same way people mention scratch-off tickets, with a shrug that carried both pride and embarrassment. Ray listened, half amused, until the man described an online listing with a single blurry photo and a 48-hour clean-out rule, the kind that kept careful buyers away. That night, Ray brought it up like he was joking, then stopped joking halfway through the sentence. Denise didn't laugh, not because she loved risk, but because she understood the math of a life that never left any extra room. Their roof had a soft spot that grew every winter. The car tires were close to bald, and Ray's last cardiology visit ended with a new prescription and a new copay. They kept an emergency envelope in a tin above the fridge, but lately it felt less like a safety net and more like a promise they couldn't fully keep. Denise said they could spare a small amount once, and only once, if it meant a chance at breathing room. Ray nodded and agreed to one rule, spoken out loud so it couldn't be negotiated later. They would set a ceiling, and when the bids hit it, they would walk away even if the unit looked like it held answers. They treated the next couple of evenings like they were studying for a test they were too old to be taking. Denise searched listings while Ray sat at the table with a notepad, writing down prices the way he used to write down parts lists. They watched a few storage auction videos, not to copy the loudness, but to learn the basics. How quickly fees stacked up, how fast a deal became trash removal, how often people got blinded by the word mystery. In a small, quiet way, Denise even did what her granddaughter always begged her to do on those videos, tapping a like, hitting subscribe, and leaving a short comment under one clip that felt honest. Please show the hard parts too. It made her feel strangely less alone, like other people out there understood that the real gamble was never treasure. It was time and back pain and dump fees. Near midnight on the second night, they found a listing that made them stop talking. The lot number was plain, the description shorter than it should have been, and the photo looked like it had been taken in a hurry. You couldn't see the inside clearly, only a suggestion of tall, squared shapes along the back wall and a single-step stool near the front. The words that mattered were simple: delinquent account, contents unknown, must be cleared in 48 hours. Ray stared at the screen long enough for his coffee to cool. Then the two of them did what couples like them always did when fear tried to sound like wisdom. They talked quietly, they listed worst-case outcomes, and they tried to make sure the decision came from choice, not panic. The auction countdown ended the next night, while a cold wind pushed snow against the kitchen window like handfuls of sand. Ray sat with his wallet on the table, not because he needed it for the website, but because it reminded him the money was real. Denise kept her arms folded tight, watching the bid bar climb in small jumps that felt too fast for comfort. The starting bid was low enough to be tempting, and the first few minutes were calm enough to feel like fate. Then another bidder appeared, raising the price in steady steps as if they had all night and plenty to spare. Ray matched them twice, then paused, hearing his own rule in his head. Denise didn't tell him what to do, but her eyes moved to the tiny tin above the fridge without either of them acknowledging it. The ceiling they set was not a fantasy number. It was a line between "we'll recover" and "we'll regret this every day until spring." Ray waited until the last minute and placed one more bid that landed just under that line, then forced himself to sit back with his hands flat on the table. The other bidder responded immediately, nudging the total higher, and for one hard second Ray felt the old urge to chase, the way people chase because losing felt like being told you didn't deserve hope. He didn't chase. He let the seconds run. The screen refreshed. The other bidder didn't move again. When the timer hit 0, the website flashed a message that made Denise's breath catch and then spill out all at once. "Congratulations, you won." Ray didn't celebrate, not yet. He just stared at the number, because it wasn't just a price. It was a decision that would carry into the next 48 hours whether the unit held junk or miracles. The next morning, they drove to the storage facility under a sky the color of dirty wool, passing holiday inflatables that sagged in the cold and a church sign that read, "Give what you can." The place sat behind a strip of bare trees, rows of metal doors lined up like tired filing cabinets. The office smelled of warm air and cheap coffee, and a small artificial wreath hung crookedly on the counter. The manager was polite but brisk, the kind of woman who had seen too many people get excited and then overwhelmed. She slid the paperwork across, pointed to rules, and repeated the one line that mattered most. 48 hours to clear it, or daily fee started. Ray signed carefully. Denise counted out their cash with fingers that didn't shake until the last bill left her hand. As the manager printed a receipt, a man in a heavy jacket lingered near the brochure rack, pretending to read about insurance options. Ray noticed because the man's eyes didn't match his posture. When the receipt came out, the man's gaze dropped straight to the lot number printed near the top, and something in his face tightened like he'd tasted metal. He waited until the manager stepped into the back room for a moment, then leaned closer with a voice low enough to feel personal. "You're the ones who won that unit," he said, not asking. Ray's stomach tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "We bought a unit," he said. The man's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I'll give you double what you paid," he offered, quick and clean. "Cash right now and you walk away." Denise's hand closed around her purse strap, as if it could anchor her. Ray didn't answer immediately, because the offer did one thing nothing else had done. It made the unit feel valuable before they had even seen it. Ray said no, not loudly, not dramatically, just firmly enough to end the conversation. The man's eyes held on him for a beat too long. Then he stepped back as if he had never spoken at all. The manager returned with 2 keys on a plain ring and a printed gate code, and she didn't mention the man because she probably hadn't noticed him as anything unusual. She reminded them to bring gloves, dollies, and help if the unit was heavy, and her tone carried the tired kindness of someone who had watched older folks overestimate what their backs could take. Denise nodded and thanked her, trying to act normal, trying to keep her heart from racing in a way she hadn't felt since raising children. Outside, the air had a sharp, clean bite that made Denise's eyes water. Ray walked her to the car, and just before he opened the driver's door, he saw a pale rectangle tucked under the windshield wiper on their side. It wasn't there when they parked. He lifted it slowly, already knowing it wasn't a coupon. The paper was blank except for a single line printed in neat block letters. "Do not open alone." Ray looked up across the lot, but the only people in sight were loading boxes into a minivan, moving like any normal day. Denise read the note, then looked at the keys in Ray's hand as if they had suddenly gained weight. They hadn't opened any door yet, and already someone was trying to steer them. The question that followed them all the way home wasn't what was inside the unit. Not yet. It was simpler and colder. Who else was waiting for those doors to roll up, and how did they know the Carters were the ones holding the key? The next morning arrived with that hard winter light that makes metal look colder than it is, and the Carters drove back to the facility like they were heading to a doctor's appointment they couldn't reschedule. Ray kept both hands on the wheel, shoulders tight under his old coat, while Denise held the keys in her pocket like they might burn a hole through the fabric. The warning note from the windshield sat folded in Denise's purse, and Ray kept replaying the man's offer from the office. Double the money. Right now, no questions, because it sounded less like a bargain and more like someone trying to stop a door from opening. They parked near the far end of the lot where the cameras were obvious, not hidden, and they took their time loading a small hand truck, work gloves, a flashlight, and 2 thick moving blankets into the corridor cart the manager had allowed them to borrow. It was not heroic, not dramatic, just a careful ritual of 2 older people who knew exactly what a pulled muscle cost. Ray insisted they would open a unit while the facility was busy, not quiet, and he timed it so workers were still walking the lanes, sweeping, checking locks, doing the ordinary things that made the place feel less like a stage. Denise watched the doors as they walked, counting them without meaning to, and the farther they went, the more she felt the difference between an idea at a kitchen table and the real sound of boots on concrete. When they reached their door, the blue paint looked the same as yesterday, but the air around it felt changed, like a room holding its breath. Ray paused before turning the key, not out of superstition, but out of plain respect for what they were doing with money that had been meant for safety. The roll-up door rose with a heavy rattle, and the first breath of air that slid out smelled faintly of dust, cold steel, and something dry like old cardboard. The unit's interior was darker than the corridor, but the overhead lights caught edges, and the shapes came into view one by one until the full picture landed. It was exactly what the blurry listing had hinted at, and still worse in person. A wall of safes pressed tight along the back and side. Big and small, mismatched brands, different decades, some with dials worn smooth, some with keyholes, some with cheap paint chips that suggested discount models, others with thick reinforced doors that looked like they belonged in an office. Several were stacked too high, and a tall cabinet-style safe stood near the corner, like a refrigerator turned toward the wall. There were no mattresses, no trash piles, no normal clutter to soften it. It was just metal after metal after metal, a skyline of locked decisions. Denise stood at the threshold, feeling a strange pinch in her chest that was part awe and part fear, because safes weren't meant to be forgotten, and people didn't usually abandon a room full of them unless something went wrong. Ray stepped in only far enough to set down the hand truck, careful not to bump anything, and he did what his years in maintenance taught him to do when something fell off. He looked for small details. He noticed dust patterns that were uneven, as if one safe had been moved more recently than the others, and he saw a torn shipping label on a mid-sized gray safe that didn't match the weathered look of the rest. He also saw scrape marks near the floor that looked newer than old ones, not bright, but still sharp enough to catch. It could have been from the previous renter packing up, or from facility handling, or from someone who had tried to move one heavy box alone and failed. Denise's eyes found the smallest safe in the front row, a simple beige fire safe with a key taped to the handle, and she felt an immediate pull toward it because it offered a quick answer, even if the answer was disappointment. They started with the beige one for the same reason people start with the easiest chore when the harder work waits behind it. It steadies the hands. The key turned stiffly, then gave with a quiet clunk that sounded too polite for the tension in Denise's stomach. Inside was not money, not jewelry, not anything that would pay for tires. It was a stack of folded dish towels, 2 small photo albums wrapped in plastic, and a tin full of buttons and foreign coins that looked more sentimental than valuable. A small envelope lay tucked behind the albums, and Denise felt her heart rise just long enough to hurt, then settle again when she opened it and found nothing but appliance manuals and a handwritten list titled Things to Remember, full of ordinary reminders like call doctor and replace porch bulb. It was oddly human, the kind of list Denise herself might have written on a tired Sunday, and for a moment she felt guilty for wanting to be treasure. Ray didn't linger on the emotion because time mattered, but he didn't throw anything away either. He set the photos and papers aside carefully, as if the act of being gentle cost nothing and might matter later. They moved to a small black cube safe next, and that one fought them immediately, dialed tight, the lock stubborn in the cold. Ray tried a few common combinations, then shook his head and moved on, deciding they would not break anything until they understood what they owned and what opening methods were reasonable. That decision calmed Denise, because it meant Ray wasn't turning into a different person under pressure, and she needed him to stay himself more than she needed a jackpot. The first Ray-all turn came from a medium gray safe that looked unremarkable until Ray spotted the keyhole and noticed a key already sitting in it, angled slightly like someone had left in a hurry. He held Denise's gaze for a second, a silent question of whether to proceed. Then he turned it slowly. The latch released with a deeper sound in the beige safe, and when the door swung open, the smell inside was sharper, paper, leather, a hint of metal polish, and the contents made Denise's mouth go dry. Neatly stacked inside were 3 small plastic cases full of baseball cards in clear sleeves, the kind collectors use, plus 2 cigar boxes taped shut and labeled in careful handwriting, halves and mint sets. Under those sat a velvet pouch that sagged with weight, and next to it a small jewelry roll tied with a ribbon that had gone stiff with age. Denise didn't touch anything at first. She just stared at the clean order of it, because it looked like someone had packed value on purpose, not by accident. Ray opened the cigar box marked halves, and saw rows of silver coins wrapped in paper rolls, all dated decades back. And even without knowing exact value, he knew silver was not nothing. Denise unrolled the jewelry wrap and found a modest but real gold chain, a pair of earrings with stone that caught the light, and a man's ring with engraving inside that made her think of someone's wedding, someone's promise, not just a resale price. Then she lifted one card case and saw a familiar face from old television broadcasts, an early-era star in a classic uniform, the kind of card people framed in sports bars, and her fingers tightened around the plastic as if it might slip away. Ray felt the same rush, but his mind went straight to the stakes. This wasn't a little help with Bill's find. This was the kind of thing that could change how their next year looked, if it was real and if they handled it right. They placed everything into a clean tote, photographing the unit for record, and Ray locked the tote in the trunk of their car under a moving blanket because the hallway doors were thin and the world had already shown them at least one person cared too much about what was behind this one. By midday, the cold had softened into a weak winter warmth that made the corridor lights feel dimmer, and Denise's emotions move in waves that surprised her. Hope, then fear hoping, then a quiet gratitude that felt almost like relief. They took a short break on the curb outside the unit, sipping coffee from a thermos and eating a sandwich Denise had wrapped in wax paper, the kind of simple lunch that kept their blood sugar steady without stealing time. Denise pulled out her phone and searched how to protect old cards and coins before appraisal, because she knew enough to fear fingerprints and humidity and the wrong kind of plastic. A short video from a collector popped up, calm and practical, and Denise did what she always did when she found something helpful and didn't want to lose it in the flood of the internet. She tapped like, hit subscribe so she could find it again, and left a quick comment asking what to do if you found older cards in good sleeves but didn't know their condition yet. It wasn't for attention and it wasn't for show. It was a simple habit of a careful woman building a small rope bridge over a problem. Ray watched her do it and felt a quiet steadiness return, because it reminded him they were still making choices like adults, not chasing fantasies. Then, as they stood and brushed crumbs in their hands, Ray caught movement at the far end of the lane. Someone lingering where there was no reason to linger. The man from the office, the one with the heavy jacket, stood half hidden near a vending machine, looking down the corridor as if he was waiting for a moment when no one else would notice. He wasn't close enough to confront them, but he was close enough to communicate that his offer hadn't been casual. Denise's stomach tightened, and Ray said only one sentence, quiet and firm. They would keep working, and they would not discuss anything valuable out loud in a hallway full of cameras and strangers. They moved faster after that, not recklessly, but with purpose, choosing safe that could be opened cleanly rather than fought. One tall cabinet safe near the side wall had a cheap, peeling hunting sticker on it that made Denise tense for reasons she didn't want to name. But when Ray found a matching key ring inside a smaller lockbox, a ring tag with handwritten numbers, they tried it, and the cabinet opened with a smooth click that felt almost too easy. Inside, there were no weapons, no horror, just more layers of other people's important. A leather binder full of old stock certificates and bond stubs from companies Denise recognized only faintly, a long velvet tray of pocket watches wrapped individually in cloth, and a sealed plastic bag filled with what looked like military medals and service pins, several engraved with names. Denise's first reaction was not greed. It was a strange sadness, because medals were earned, and whatever family had owned them had lost track of them somewhere along the way. She set those aside with care, already thinking of veteran groups and how to return named items if possible, while Ray focused on the documents, reading dates, noticing how some certificates were canceled and some were not, which meant they could range from worthless paper to surprising value depending on the issuer. They found a thick envelope of old holiday cards, too, with snowflake designs from decades ago, and inside one was a short note written in a shaky hand that made Denise's throat tighten. If anything happens, keep what keeps you safe and pass the rest back when you can. It wasn't instructions, and it wasn't a confession, just a glimpse of someone older planning for uncertainty the same way they did, and it made Denise feel the weight of what they were doing in a different way. Ray, practical as ever, photographed everything, stacked possible value separate from likely sentimental, and kept his eye on the corridor every time a cart squeaked past, because the man at the vending machine had shifted from curiosity to pressure in Ray's mind, and pressure never stayed polite forever. Late afternoon brought the closest thing to a mini climax they could handle without breaking something. A heavy fire safe with a dial that had been scratched with tiny marks, as if someone had used it 100 times and didn't care who noticed. Ray studied the scratches, not as a puzzle for fun, but as a problem with minutes attached to it. He lined his finger along the marks, tried a sequence that matched the spacing, and on the third attempt the dial caught, then released with a quiet mechanical surrender that made Denise's breath hitch. The door opened to reveal a bank deposit bag, sealed, with a printed logo from a regional bank and a handwritten date that was recent enough to make Ray's scalp prickle. Next to it sat a slim black case that looked modern compared to everything else, and beneath that was a folded pack of papers held together with a binder clip. Denise reached for the papers first and saw copies of storage receipts, money order stubs, and a handwritten list of safe numbers that matched the labels on the key ring they'd found earlier. The list had one line circled hard enough to tear the paper. C-17, do not let them relock. Denise didn't understand it at first, not fully, but Ray did, because he had lived long enough to recognize a warning when it was finally written plain. He didn't open the bank bag. Not there, not in that unit, because he understood there were laws and claims and risks attached to money that looked official. He set it back took photos, and then with a careful hand, he opened the slim black case. Inside was a cheap prepaid phone and a folded note written in block letters that didn't match the older handwriting at all. Call before you leave. Denise felt cold move through her chest like a draft under a door, because that note didn't feel like something abandoned years ago. It felt like something placed with intention. Ray shut the case, locked the fire safe again, and for the first time that day his voice carried real urgency, still quiet but sharp. They were done for the day, and they were locking the unit now. They rolled the door down with hands that suddenly felt clumsy, not from age, but from adrenaline trying to borrow strength from fear. Ray slid their padlock into place the way he had done 1,000 times on tool sheds and gates, then stopped because something was wrong. The shackle didn't fit the way it had this morning, not quite, and the metal felt different on his glove, smoother, older. Denise leaned closer and saw it too. The padlock on the latch wasn't the one they brought. Their lock was brass and new, bought yesterday. This one was dull and scratched, stamped with tiny letters she couldn't read. Ray's pulse kicked hard enough to make his ears ring, and he looked down the corridor where the vending machine stood, where the heavy jacket man had been, but the lane was empty now except for a distant cart rolling and the hum of the lights. Denise turned toward the office, ready to call the manager, but Ray held up a hand, not to stop her forever, only to stop her from reacting fast and loud in a place where someone had already proven they could touch their unit without permission. The unit was shut, and the lock on it was not theirs, and whatever was inside suddenly felt less like a chance and more like a test. The question that followed them as they stood in the cold hallway wasn't whether the safes held money anymore. It was who had the nerve to swap a lock in broad daylight. And what would they do next if the Carters refused to play along? Ray did not yank on the unfamiliar padlock or start arguing in the hallway, even though his throat felt tight enough to choke on every breath. He stood close to the latch, studied the fresh scratches around the hasp, and forced his shoulders to relax until his hands stopped shaking. Denise stayed beside him, not touching the door, watching the far end of the lane the way she used to watch a hospital corridor when something fell off but quiet. A few doors down, another renter rolled his unit shut, metal clanging in a way that sounded too normal for what Ray was seeing, and that normal sound made his stomach turn, because it proved how easy it was to hide a bad act inside ordinary noise. He took a slow step back and looked at the facility's posted rules again, as if a sign could explain why their brand new lock was gone. In the bright winter air outside the corridor, the facility's holiday garland drooped along the office awning, and a string of tired bulbs blinked out of rhythm. It was late December, the kind of week when people smiled more in public and cut more corners in private, and Ray felt the season pressing on him like a hand. They had bought this unit to protect their home from one more year of slow leaks and quiet disappointments, and now the unit itself was becoming a problem that could swallow them if they reacted wrong. They walked to the office with careful, even steps, as if moving too fast might invite someone to follow. The manager looked up from her desk and recognized them immediately. Then her eyes flicked to their faces and changed. Softening into a tired caution, she tried to hide behind professionalism. Ray kept one hand on the counter, not gripping, just anchoring himself, and said their lock had been replaced. The manager did not deny it, but she didn't admit fault either. She reached under the desk, pulled out a clipboard, and used the same steady tone she used for late fees and gate codes. She said there had been a security concern in that lane, and policy required a temporary facility lock when staff suspected tampering. Denise asked when it happened, and the manager answered with time that did not match the moment Ray remembered seeing their brass lock. The explanation sounded rehearsed, like something she could say without thinking, and Ray felt the story wobble under its own weight. He asked to see an incident note and the camera log, because he had learned long ago that clear questions often made shaky stories collapse. The manager's mouth tightened at the corners as her eyes drifted toward the back office where the monitors sat. She said she could not show footage to tenants, only to law enforcement, and offered to cut the lock in the morning when her supervisor arrived. Ray nodded like he accepted the delay, but he did not let the moment pass without marking it. He asked for the policy in writing and watched her hands as she pointed to a paragraph on the posted rules. Denise could feel him holding the line without raising his voice, and she understood why. A couple their age did not win fights by getting loud. They won by staying calm and forcing everything onto paper. They drove home with the shoebox of valuables tucked deep under blankets in the trunk, heater blowing too hot, a low Christmas song on the radio that suddenly felt wrong. Denise kept thinking about the small warning note they had found inside one of the safes, the one that suggested someone expected trouble, because it now sounded less like paranoia and more like experience. At home, they did not celebrate anything they had found so far. They treated it like a job. Denise cleared the kitchen table, laid down a clean towel, and wrote a list of every item they had removed, photographing each piece with the date visible on the phone screen. Ray placed a warning note beside their auction receipt and the manager's business card, then wrote down what she had said, including the time that did not match his memory. They moved the jewelry roll into a plain tin that looked like it belonged in a pantry, not a safe, because older people who lived through tight years learned to hide valuable things in boring places. When the phone buzzed with a missed call from an unknown number, Ray did not answer, and Denise did not suggest blocking it. They recorded it. They saved the screenshot. They added it to the growing folder that already felt heavier than any steel box. Denise stared at the half-wrapped gifts of their grandkids, the red paper and crooked tape lines, and felt a bitter twist of irony. They had taken this risk to keep Christmas from turning into another year of apologies and maybe next time. Now the holiday was wrapped in a different kind of worry, and she could not decide which felt worse, being poor or being watched. The next morning, they did what careful people do when the stakes rise. They asked for help early, before pride could turn a problem into a disaster. Ray called the sheriff's non-emergency line and described the situation in simple terms. Storage auction purchase, locker place without their consent, possible tampering, then waited while Denise made coffee she barely touched. By late morning, a deputy met them at the facility, not rushing in with drama, just a steady presence with a notebook and a calm, practical face. The manager's posture changed the moment she saw the uniform. Her voice became more careful, and she led them to back office without arguing about policy. On a small monitor, grainy footage showed the lane at different times, and the truth arrived in ugly, ordinary frames. A man in a heavy jacket stood near their unit for less than a minute, blocking the latch with his body, while another figure worked quickly at the lock. They did not pry the door or smash anything. They moved like people who knew exactly what they needed and how little time they had. The manager leaned closer and said she had never seen them before, but her fingers tightened around her walkie-talkie as if she was trying to keep it from shaking. The deputy asked for the footage to be saved, wrote down the timestamp, and photographed the latch, the replaced padlock, and the scuffed paint around the hasp. Only after that did the manager cut the unfamiliar lock with bolt cutters and hand it to the deputy, like it suddenly mattered to her in a new way. Ray replaced it with a new brass lock he had bought that morning, then added a second lock to the spare hasp, a simple step that made quick tampering harder. When the door rolled up, the unit looked mostly the same, but Ray's eye caught a thin line in the dust on the concrete. One mid-sized safe near the front had been pulled forward and pushed back, leaving a clean streak like a fingerprint. Denise's throat tightened because it meant the intruders had not come to steal random items. They had searched, and they had searched with purpose. Ray did not try to be brave inside the unit after seeing the footage, because bravery without a plan was just another way to get hurt. He made a decision that felt both practical and painful. They would remove a few smaller safes and take them home to open in controlled conditions, away from a thin metal door and a public lane. The manager, suddenly eager to prove cooperation, signed a short note stating the Carters were authorized to move items out while clearing the unit and granted them an extra day for a reduced daily fee if they kept the area clean. Ray accepted, because rushing heavy metal was how backs got ruined and mistakes got made. They loaded 2 small safes and 1 medium one onto the hand truck, wrapped them in moving blankets, and eased them into the trunk with slow, synchronized movements that couples learn after decades of lifting groceries, grandchildren, and each other's burdens. At home, Ray opened the first small safe using a key taped to it on the side, and the contents hit Denise with a sudden, sharp tenderness. Inside were letters tied with green ribbon, postmarked across the 70s and 80s, and a neat stack of Christmas cards with family photos tucked inside, faces smiling at a summer picnic long gone. Beneath the paper lay silver dollars in plastic flips, and under that, a small wooden box holding a fountain pen set that looked expensive enough to matter. The medium safe held a different kind of strange, rolled sheet music, a compact pair of binoculars, and a sealed tube with documents that looked like certificates. None of it was the instant miracle they had imagined when they first bid, but it all said the same thing in a quiet, steady voice. Someone had organized these safes with care, and people did not abandon care unless something snapped. In the middle of that long afternoon, Denise steadied herself the way she always did when fear tried to take her thoughts hostage. She found a reliable step and followed it. She pulled up a short video from an older coin dealer who spoke plainly about how to handle collectible coins without damaging them, how to avoid cleaning mistakes that destroy value, and how to store paper items safely until appraisal. Denise watched the video twice, then tapped subscribe so she could find it again later, and left a comment asking how to separate sentimental keepsakes from items meant for sale without losing track of what came from where. It did not feel like following a channel. It felt like building a small guardrail for their own judgment when everything was getting blurry. Ray watched her from a kitchen doorway and felt something loosen in his chest, because it reminded him they were not alone in figuring this out, even if the help came through a screen. Then the pressure wave returned, right on schedule, when his phone buzzed with another call from the same unknown number. The call ended before voicemail, like someone testing whether he would pick up. Ray did not answer, but he did not dismiss it either. He saved the call log, wrote down the time, and tucked the record into the same folder as the deputy's card. Denise did not say much, but her hands moved faster as she sealed the letters and coins into label containers. She understood something now that she had not wanted to admit on day one. The danger was not the safes themselves. The danger was what someone else believed was inside, and how far they might go to keep the Carters from reaching it first. The next day, they handled the most uncomfortable discovery the correct way, even though it hurt to surrender control. Ray and Denise drove a sealed deposit bag, found in a safe and printed with the bank's logo, to a local branch in daylight, winter air biting their cheeks as they crossed the lot. Inside, the bank smelled like carpet cleaner and pine-scented air freshener, and a small artificial tree stood in the corner with ornaments that looked too perfect to be touched. A manager took them into a side office, listened without judgment, and explained what Ray already suspected. A sealed deposit bag with account markings could be tied to an individual or business, and opening it themselves could create legal problems that would swallow any benefit. The manager asked for the incident number the deputy had given them, made copies of their auction receipt, and logged the bag as found property connected to a storage auction purchase, promising it would be processed through proper channels. Denise felt a sharp pinch of regret as she watched the bag disappear into a locked drawer, because she had already pictured paying for roof repairs and gifts. Ray squeezed her hand under the desk, not as a speech, just as a reminder of the line they were choosing to hold. The manager did not promise the money. He promised them a paper trail, and Ray understood why that mattered more. People who swapped locks hated paperwork, because paper turned threats into dates, and dates turned stories into evidence. That evening, they returned to the unit while daylight still held, determined to keep clearing without giving anyone an excuse to control the pace. The corridor felt different under the buzzing lights. The manager had placed a bright, cameras active sign near the lane, and a portable security camera sat clipped to a pole by the corner, angled toward their door like an extra pair of eyes. Ray rolled the unit open and noticed a small, ugly detail that made Denise's stomach drop. One of the smaller safes near the front now had a strip of masking tape on it that had not been there before, a single letter written in thick marker, B. Ray did not rip it off in anger. He photographed it first, then peeled it carefully and sealed it in a plastic bag, because by now he understood the real fight was over records. Inside the safe marked with that letter, there was not cash or jewelry or anything they could sell. There was a printed photograph of Ray and Denise at the unit door, shot from down the lane, and behind it a short note written in blunt block letters. You're opening the wrong ones. The real one is still here. Ray stared at the words until they blurred, then looked at the wall of locked steel, like it had changed shape right in front of him. If the real one was still in that unit, then what had the intruders been hunting for, and how close were the Carters to putting their hands on it next? Ray did not sleep much after reading the note, because the words stayed lodged in his mind like grit under a fingernail. The unit felt different now, not because the safes looked new, but because someone else had reached inside their week and touched it. Denise made breakfast in the gray light of December morning, the kind of cold morning when the kitchen window sweats and the neighbor's wreath hangs stiff as cardboard, and she kept her movement steady, as if calm hands could calm the world. Ray checked the locks twice before they left, then checked their folder again, because he was starting to understand that the safest thing they owned was a timeline. At the facility, the corridor lights buzzed above their heads and made the concrete look pale and tired. The portable camera still pointed toward their door, and the camera's active sign sat crooked on its stand like an afterthought. But it was better than nothing. Ray rolled the door up just enough to step under it, then stopped and listened. No footsteps nearby, no carts, no voices, only the small ticking sound of cold metal warming up as the morning climbed. The note had been left inside a safe, which meant the person had either opened it or already knew which one contained it. That detail pushed Ray's worry into a sharper place. He and Denise were not dealing with a random prowler who wanted easy cash. They were dealing with someone who believed there was a specific real safe, and that belief alone could make people reckless. Ray walked the line of safes slowly, not touching anything yet, studying the scratches, the dust patterns, the tiny differences in how each door sat in its frame. He saw two safes with fresher rub marks near the hinges, like someone had tried to shift them without fully moving them. He also noticed a thin smear of black grease on the concrete where none had been before. Denise crouched and held her phone low to photograph it, and Ray felt his stomach tighten, because grease belonged to tools, not to chance. They had come here hoping for enough value to fix their roof before the next storm season, and now the most valuable thing might be the ability to keep their hands from shaking while they made the next decision. They chose caution first, because older people who have lived through hard years know that panic always makes the bill higher. Ray called the deputy again from the end of the lane, keeping his voice quiet, and explained that someone had left a message inside one of the safes and that they suspected continued targeting. The deputy arrived within the hour, asked to see the note, and photographed everything again with the patient focus of someone who preferred facts to theories. He did not promise miracles or arrests. He promised documentation and extra patrol checks for the next couple of nights, because the facility had already become a place of interest. He advised them to avoid opening anything in the open that looked like it contained high-value property, because a public lane was not a private living room, and opportunists loved timing. That advice landed hard because it meant spending more money they had hoped to save, but it also made the path clearer. Ray and Denise paid for another day on the unit, signed the extension slip, and decided to move the most suspicious safes off-site one by one, even if it meant renting a small trailer for a weekend. They did not announce this plan to the manager, and they did not talk about it loudly in the corridor, because the easiest way to lose control was to let someone else hear the schedule. Denise wrote down which safes had been disturbed, marked them with tiny pencil dots in hidden corners only she would notice, and packed their car with moving blankets, ratchet straps, and a cheap door alarm that could hang inside the unit overnight. Ray stood by the open door and looked at the line of steel again, thinking about the simple math that had gotten them here. They had gambled to protect their home, not to collect stories, and now the story was trying to collect them. By early afternoon, they were ready to bring in the only person who could help without turning this into a circus. Ray found a licensed locksmith through a local referral list and arranged a single appointment at their home, not at the facility, because he refused to open the real one under fluorescent lights where anyone could walk past. The locksmith arrived in a plain truck with a small ladder rack, older than Ray, but still steady, with hands that moved like they had learned patience from metal. He checked identification, filled out a simple form, and asked to see proof of purchase for the safes they wanted opened. Ray showed the auction receipt and the extension slip, and the locksmith nodded, as if he had seen stranger things without needing the details. They worked in the garage, the cold air smelling faintly of winter rain and old motor oil, and Denise stood nearby with her phone ready, recording the safe's exterior and its serial plate before anything changed. They started with mid-sized safe Ray had marked as suspected, one that had a newer dial and less dust around the seam, like it had been used more recently than the others. The locksmith listened, tested, and moved slowly, because speed was how you ruined locks and wrecked evidence. The first attempt produced nothing but a dull clunk and a shake of his head. The second attempt, after he adjusted the pressure with a careful touch of someone opening a stubborn jar, ended in a soft click that felt louder than it should. Denise did not cheer. Ray did not grin. Their hearts did not do anything dramatic. They simply tightened as the door swung open and the truth sat there, arranged neatly like someone expected it to be found. Inside were sealed plastic sleeves holding vintage baseball cards, older ones, with the kind of worn corners and soft color that signaled real age, not modern reprints. Beneath those sat a long velvet pouch containing 2 pocket watches with engraved backs, each wrapped in tissue, and beside them lay a stack of stock certificates from a railroad company that no longer existed, printed on thick paper with ornate borders. At the bottom, in a hard case, rested a compact camera with a metal body, and a lens cap still clipped on, the kind collectors talked about the way car people talked about classic engines. It was not cash, not a movie fortune, but it was unmistakably value, and it was value in the exact form that attracted the wrong kind of attention. Small, portable, and easy to sell without leaving fingerprints. Ray felt his knees go weak for a second, not from greed, but from the sudden knowledge that the note was not bluffing. Someone had been hunting a safe like this. Denise did what she always did when the world tried to get ahead of her. She made the next right move while her feelings caught up later. She photographed every layer as it came out, laid items on a clean towel, and labeled each grouping with the safe number and timestamp. Ray asked the locksmith in a careful, quiet tone whether these types of items needed special handling, and the man gave him practical rules without drama. Do not clean cards. Do not polish watches. Do not remove certificates from sleeves if they are brittle. Keep everything together until appraisal. Denise, still thinking about how easy it was for a small mistake to destroy value, pulled up the collectible forums she had been reading in the evenings and searched for guidance on handling vintage cards and old watches. She found a channel run by an older collector who explained things in plain language, and she tapped subscribe so she could keep the advice, then left a comment asking how retirees could find a reputable appraiser without getting pressured into a bad quick sale. It was not about entertainment. It was about building a small wall of knowledge between them and the people who preyed on inexperience. Ray watched her do it and felt a quiet gratitude that she could still move forward even when she was scared. Then, as if the day needed one more shove, his phone buzzed again with the unknown number. This time it did not call and hang up. It sent a text. Stop moving things. Leave the unit. You already took what matters. Ray's stomach turned cold, because the message implied the sender knew they had removed a safe, and there had been no one in their garage except them and the locksmith. That meant either the sender was guessing, or the sender had eyes closer than Ray wanted to imagine. Denise read the message once, then calmly took a screenshot and added it to the folder. We keep going, but we keep it boring, she said, voice steady. Ray nodded, because boring was exactly what scared bullies hated. They returned to the facility before dusk, not to open more safes, but to move faster than the people circling them. The winter light faded early, turned the corridor into a long strip of gray, and the holiday music on the office radio drifted out in thin, tinny notes that felt almost insulting. Ray backed a rented trailer close to their lane, and Denise stood watch at the end of the row, not because she wanted confrontation, but because she refused to be surprised again. They loaded 2 more safes, both smaller, both previously marked as disturbed, and they did it quietly, without showing anyone what they were taking. The manager appeared once, lingering too long near the office doorway, eyes tracking the trailer, and Ray felt a flicker of anger because curiosity was cheap and silence was safer. He gave her a polite nod and nothing else. On their final trip back into the unit that evening, Ray noticed a new detail that made his chest tighten. A thin piece of shiny metal, like a broken lock shim, lay near the base of the safe stack, half kicked under the concrete lip. It had not been there before, and it was the kind of tool someone used to slip latches quickly. Ray photographed it, bagged it, and placed it in the folder with the same care he would have used for a family heirloom. Then, as Denise rolled the door down for the night, she spotted a paper corner sticking out from behind a tall gun cabinet at the back of the unit. She did not reach for it immediately. She pulled the cabinet forward just enough to see the paper was taped to the wall, hidden from casual view. Ray peeled it off slowly and felt his throat close when he read it. It was a copy of their auction receipt, printed on plain paper, with one line written across the top in thick marker. Midnight. Last offer. They stared at each other in the cold corridor, the hum of the lights filling the silence, and the same question rose in both of them at once. If someone had gone to the trouble of printing their receipt and hiding it inside their unit, how close was that person willing to get next? Ray did not wait until midnight to negotiate, because he had already learned what people like that counted on. He and Denise drove straight to the deputy's office with the copied receipt, the text message, the photos of the grease smear, and the little shim they had bagged, and they laid it all out in the same quiet order Denise used for medical paperwork. The deputy listened without rushing, asked a few plain questions, and made one thing clear with his tone. Whoever printed their receipt and hid it inside the unit had crossed from curiosity into intimidation. He explained what Ray had been afraid to say out loud, that a midnight offer was rarely an offer, and that the safest response was to let the pressure land on the right shoulders. The plan that followed was not glamorous, but it was solid. Ray would not go alone, and he would not hand anyone anything. The deputy arranged for a patrol unit to sit close enough to see the lane without drawing a crowd, and he had Ray forward the text messages to an evidence number so the chain stayed clean. Back at home, Denise made a pot of soup as if routine could hold the edges of the day together, while Ray printed copies of their receipts and wrote down the serial plates of the safes they had removed to the garage. They did not open anything else that night. They sat at the kitchen table, the tree lights blinking softly in the corner, and Ray realized how strange it was that the same season that used to feel warm now felt like a test. Denise reached across and squeezed his hand. Not dramatic, just steady, and he felt his fears shift into something more useful. If someone wanted to turn this into a quick shakedown, then Ray and Denise would turn it into paperwork, witnesses, and consequences. When the time came, Ray and Denise returned to the storage facility earlier than the appointment, because the safest place to be at midnight was not in a lane of shadowed doors. They parked where the office light still spilled onto the asphalt, and they did exactly what the deputy advised. They waited, visible, calm, and boring. The minutes moved slowly, the cold sharpening every sound, until a dark sedan rolled in and stopped near their row like it had done it before. A man stepped out and walked with too much confidence for someone who belonged there, and Ray's chest tightened when he saw the manager's silhouette watching from the office window. The man did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply tried to talk Ray into a clean solution, saying that a unit like theirs attracted trouble, and that for a fair cut, he could make the problem disappear by taking the interesting safes off their hands. Ray let him speak just long enough for the deputy, position out of sight, to hear the pitch and step into the light. That was the end of the confidence. The man's shoulders dipped, his words tangled, and he started changing the story in real time, which told Ray everything he needed to know. No one got hurt, and no hero speeches happened. It was paperwork in a calm voice and a set of questions that did not let him wriggle away. When the manager was asked why she had been watching, she tried to look offended, then tried to look helpful, then finally looked tired. The truth came out in pieces. She had mentioned the safe unit to a friend who resold storage goods. The friend had gotten greedy when he heard about vintage cars and watches, and the midnight offer was meant to scare two older people into handing over valuables for quick cash. It was not a cartel, not a conspiracy, just ordinary, ugly opportunism. Ray felt a slow wave of relief that made his knees weak, because the fear had been heavier than the reality. But the reality was still bad enough to sting. The deputy issued clear instructions, told the man and the manager to stop contact immediately, and made sure Ray and Denise understood their rights and options. On the drive home, Denise stared out at the lit storefronts and said one quiet sentence that sounded like the center of the whole story. "They counted on us being embarrassed," she said. "They counted on us being quiet." Ray nodded, hands steady on the wheel, and for the first time in days his chest loosened, because quiet was no longer their only tool. With the pressure lifted, Ray and Denise finally handled the rest the way they had planned from the beginning. Slowly, legally, and with receipts for everything. They paid the facility's extra day fees without fighting, because the manager had lost the right to act annoyed, and because paying cleanly kept their timeline clean. They moved the remaining safes over 2 more mornings, using the trailer and blankets, and they did not open anything at the facility again. Instead, they scheduled 2 sessions with the licensed locksmith at their home, opening safes in batches, photographing each layer, and separating items into simple categories: personal keepsakes, obvious scrap, items needing appraisal, and documents that should not be sold at all. The finds were the kind that felt unbelievable only because they were mixed with so much nonsense. One small fire safe held nothing but holiday cookie cutters and a handwritten recipe book, and Denise smiled at that because it reminded her of her mother's handwriting. Another held a neatly wrapped bundle of old military letters. Not dramatic, just human, and they set those aside to try returning them through local groups. Several safes were empty or held cheap costume jewelry, or a bizarre collection of unopened batteries and flashlights, and each time Ray felt his old optimism try to deflate, he forced himself to remember the good items were already real and already documented. The true value kept appearing in quiet, portable ways. A cigar box of silver dollars that an appraiser confirmed as common but still worth something. A set of first-edition books with intact dust jackets that surprised even a locksmith. And, tucked behind a false back panel in a narrow document safe, a small envelope of vintage baseball cards that were not just old, but graded worthy. They did not claim wild numbers. They drove to a reputable card shop, paid for a proper valuation, and watched the owner's face change when he recognized a few names and years. The offer he made was fair, not magical, and it came with paperwork, but it was still enough to make Denise's eyes fill when she realized what it meant. If you enjoy stories where the win is not fantasy, but careful steps that actually change a couple's real life, that's the moment people usually hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment about what they would have done first. Call the police, sell immediately, or keep going one safe at a time. They close the last loose ends with the same steady discipline that had kept them safe. The deputy advised them to keep all texts and notes archived for a while, and they did. Denise kept a simple binder of receipts, appraisals, and sales, because she did not want a single dollar to feel slippery. They declared what they needed to declare, paid what they owed, and chose patience over quick cash whenever a buyer tried to pressure them. The remaining empty safes went to a scrap buyer with scale and receipt, and the scrap money covered the locksmith fees and the trailer rental, which made Ray grin in that quiet way older men do when the math finally behaves. They returned a few personal items, too. A class ring went back to a family who had posted online for years. A small engraved medal was delivered through a local veterans group, and the thank you call Denise received afterward stayed with her longer than any appraisal number. Then, with the unit cleared and their paperwork squared away, they finally did what started this whole risk. They fixed their house. The roof was repaired before the next storm front rolled through. The tires were replaced before another winter drive, and the credit card balance that had shadowed them for years dropped to 0. The biggest change was not the repairs, though. It was a feeling of breathing, without flinching at every envelope in the mailbox. Denise bought their granddaughter's school trip outright, then added a little extra for warm gloves and a decent coat. And she did it without borrowing, without shame, and without the tight smile that says, "We'll figure out later." Ray stood at the hardware store checkout with a cart full of shingles and felt something close to gratitude for the first time in a long time, not because luck had saved them, but because they had not let greed or fear steer the wheel. On the first truly cold evening after the roof was finished, Ray and Denise sat together on their porch with 2 mugs of coffee, watching their breath drift into the air while the neighborhood lights blinked through windows. Their life was still simple, still theirs, but it no longer felt like it was one surprise away from collapse. They did not become people who chased storage auctions every week, because they had learned how easily other people's curiosity could turn predatory, and how quickly a deal could become stress if you let it. They agreed on one quiet rule: no more auctions unless they could afford to walk away with nothing and still sleep fine. The safes, in the end, gave them more than money. They gave them proof that even later in life, when the world tries to tell you your best chances are behind you, careful courage still counts. They had opened a door in winter, carried the weight together, and come out the other side with their homes safer and their dignity intact. And if there was a moral Ray carried with him, it was simple enough to remember without writing it down. When an unexpected chance shows up, take it with your eyes open. Keep your record straight, and never let anyone rush you into handing over what you earned.